Zohran Mamdani is the 33-year-old state lawmaker running for New York City mayor who's recently swept the city's Democratic primary. The self-declared Democratic socialist came from behind by campaigning hard on affordability, or lack thereof, in America's most expensive city. If elected, he promises to institute a citywide rent freeze, to increase affordable housing, to provide free buses and free childcare, among other things, all of it paid for with new taxes on the city's wealthy and large corporations. That populist platform has many of the city's power brokers and corporate leaders mobilizing against him. Mayor Eric Adams and former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, the two other prominent mayoral candidates in the race, both Democrats who are now running as independents, have reportedly appealed to Wall Street for financial backing against Mamdani's run. But after this week, Mamdani may have found some common ground with at least some of the city's business leaders. The Partnership for New York City, it's a nonprofit business advocacy group made up of some of the city's most high-powered executives, invited Mamdani to meet with business leaders during a two-day consortium this week. Those in attendance, including finance and real estate executives, lawyers, and more than a few billionaires, asked Mamdani pointed questions about fiscal and tax policies, as well as his stance on Israel and the war in Gaza. How'd it go? Well, by many accounts, it went better than anticipated. One attendee, described as a top finance executive, told the Financial Times, quote, "The meeting was a net positive. He listened, he was genuinely wanting to engage, and ultimately gave most people present a sense that he cares about New York and wants to be the mayor of all New Yorkers," end quote. Another business leader said, quote, "Do I or any of my friends want him to win? The answer is no. Emphatically no. But I think there's some room to work with him," end quote. And Kathy Wild, CEO of Partnership for New York City, told The Gothamist that executives she spoke with found Mamdani, quote, "much less scary," end quote, even though they disagreed on some issues. For more on this, I'm joined by my good friend and former co-anchor Pat Kiernan, anchor of Mornings on One on Spectrum News New York One, and Christina Greer, professor of political science at Fordham University, co-host of the podcast FAQ NYC, author of the book Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream, for what is definitely going to be my most fun segment today, to have you two friends on here. Pat, great to have you back on the show. Talk to me about this for a second. I don't want to overstate this. Nobody at that meeting overwhelmingly came out and said, I didn't like Mamdani, now I'm going to support him. But he went into the lion's den, and the much less scary part is probably the big takeaway.
I mean, Ali, I was thinking exactly that as you were reading through those quotes, that that is a very lukewarm endorsement from the business community. But no, they are realizing that if this happens, and there's a good chance that it does happen, that they can work with Zohran Mamdani, and like in any primary, right? His appeal in the primary, his pitch in the primary, may be to a different set of voters. So he has already made some concessions to the center. It is certainly coming from the left in the primary, but has made some concessions that he could work with a more moderate group of Democrats and a more moderate group of Republicans. And the reality in New York City politics is that the mayor has to rely on the city council, and the mayor has to rely a lot on the state legislature, and they're not embracing all of these far left ideas that Zohran Mamdani is delivering.
Christina, let's talk about, I mean, there's a bit of practicality on everybody's side on this thing, right? As Pat says, he's won the primary. He seems to be doing well with voters. So what harm is it to him to go in and try and appear less scary to these business interests? And to the business interests, as Pat says, guy could win the election. So they've got some interest in being able to say, at the very least, lukewarm though it may be, there may be room to work with him.
Absolutely. And in New York, Ali, you have to kind of get the big four, which is business, real estate, labor, and the Hasidic community. And so right now he's chipping away at the business community. He's introducing himself to many people. Obviously the president and Cuomo and Adams are saying, he is this African-born Muslim socialist that so many people were afraid of in 2008. But when you actually sit down, there's the campaigning phase and there's the governance phase. Zohran Mamdani is fantastic at the campaigning phase, and more people who sit down with him recognize that there could be some really interesting and forthright conversations during the governance phase. We haven't necessarily seen the real estate community come around. The labor community slowly but surely is coming around for a general election. And as Pat said, he's shown that he's willing to have conversations about policing, about various micro issues in different communities, about housing, about how he plans to implement a lot of these really interesting policies that a lot of New Yorkers want/need in a Trump administration, where we know that the money will be very tight on the state level and also coming from the federal government.
Yeah, Pat, when he won the primary, there were a lot of people talking about how this is the future of the Democratic Party and all this kind of stuff. And my instinct, because you and I have been financial journalists for a long time, is that he was speaking to issues that motivate voters in a place where the rent is too damn high.
Well, and look at how many young voters he motivated to be part of his campaign, brought out those young voters in tremendous numbers, a lesson that I think any city can take something from, that there is a group of voters there that's not the typical older voter, not the typical union voter pushed out to the polls by union leaders. These were young people who, to use that phrase again, feel the rent is too damn high and wanted to do something about it. And this was the guy who was speaking to them.
Christina, to the union point, Mamdani won the backing of Local 1199, which is a union that represents 200,000 healthcare workers in New York, after that union had rescinded its support of Andrew Cuomo. The board president, the local board president, wrote in a statement, quote, "Working people across New York City are uniting to defend our neighborhoods and our city from unprecedented attacks from extremist politicians and their billionaire donors who are taking away health care, ripping families apart, and endangering our democracy. We're proud to endorse Zohran Mamdani, who will fight side by side with us to ensure New Yorkers get the services they need to build affordable housing and create safe communities." You talked about this. How far down the road is he in getting all the union support that he needs?
All right. So, a lot of unions backed Cuomo in the primary, largely because they assumed that the three-term governor and the son of a three-term governor was the heir apparent to the Democratic nomination. We've also, Ali, been seeing over the several years, there's been a fissure between the top brass in unions and the rank and file and what they want. We've seen this a lot in presidential elections,
sure,
but we're seeing it in local elections as well. And so I think, unions like 1199 are recognizing that their rank and file members are resonating with this message. It's not just a message of hope. It's an economic message that says, we want to be able to stay in this city. We want to be able to have not just affordable housing, better schools, better transportation to get to said jobs in the city. So I think a lot of the leadership in unions across New York are recognizing that this is what their rank and file members want, and they need to get on board actually for their own political viability as well.
Municipal politics on this show, but this story is sort of bigger than municipal politics. And one of the things that makes it bigger, Pat, is all of the personalities who are running for mayor right now. Zohran Mamdani is the Democratic nominee. Mm-hmm. Eric Adams is actually the mayor. Andrew Cuomo was actually the governor and is from a political family. Both of them have squandered some of their political capital. And the current head of the Guardian Angels, the always head of the Guardian Angels, Curtis Sliwa, is the Republican nominee. Talk to me about how this all works out. Is there some chance of Democrats splitting the vote so much that Curtis Sliwa becomes the mayor of New York City?
It's not a zero chance. I mean, Curtis is polling well enough that he's a factor in this race. He's run for mayor before, but by all accounts, he's running a more serious campaign this time. And in the past, he has really played into his personality as a radio host. Curtis, I believe, thinks that there's a chance to do something this time. And then, as you said, you've got these other two very familiar candidates to New Yorkers in Andrew Cuomo, who by all accounts was expected to win in the primary, but ran a terrible campaign by his own admission the other day. And Eric Adams, when do you discount the incumbent? Eric Adams has done a lot to try to lose the support he had 4 years ago, but you can't completely discount the incumbent. And some of the law enforcement unions made that clear just the other day, when despite so many allegations of him running a corrupt NYPD, he got a lot of the big law enforcement units to come around and say, "You're our guy going into November."
What do you think, Christina? How does this all play out? This is not one Democratic candidate versus one Republican candidate in this particular instance.
Right, Allie. And in political science, we say it's called first past the post. So basically, whoever gets the most votes wins. This is not ranked choice like we saw in the primary. You don't have to get 50% or more like we've seen in other cities. I would add to Pat's analysis, though, there's, you'll always have lots of other candidates that are on the ballot that
Sure.
don't normally mean anything. But in such a close election, they actually do mean something because they're siphoning off votes. There's a fifth candidate that I would say, Jim Walden, who is a respected lawyer. I have questions about his management style. That's just me. We've interviewed him before. But he is someone where he's not a Republican, and there are many Democrats who would not vote for Curtis Sliwa. But there's several Republicans who would not vote for a Democrat or someone who's aligned with the Democratic Party, and that would be Mamdani, Adams, and Cuomo, which gives Walden a space for some voters who are torn between these, what they might argue as four highly problematic candidates for several different reasons. So we could see a scenario where the mayor of New York City is elected with roughly 30% of the vote. And as Pat mentioned, Curtis Sliwa, as many people know him as the red beret guy on the subway, but we do know that the Republican candidate in every mayoral election gets about 30 to 33% of the Republican vote.
Sure.
And if all the other votes are splintered, then we could be seeing a scenario, which I don't think is likely, but there is a path for Curtis Sliwa. And so voters need to take this very seriously. But I do think that the upside of all these candidates is that we'll actually see a higher turnout because participation in New York City mayoral elections has been pretty abysmal and embarrassingly low.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Pat. Does this goose participation, because literally everybody's talking about the New York City mayoral election now in a way that it's not common?
Yeah, but I mean, we had a really interesting primary season 4 years ago. We had a really interesting primary here, and still the turnout was very low. I don't know what Christina's view on that is, but I don't think we're going to see any sort of significant improvement in turnout, even with all this excitement, all this coverage, all this uncertainty.
Christina, do you think it gooses turnout at all?
I think Mamdani is banking on an Obama 2008 strategy where if he is going to be successful, he actually has to have new people in the electoral process. And that's what he worked on during the primary. And I think that's what he'll be working on these next few months until November. It has been so embarrassingly low. But in a scenario where it's five major candidates going against one another, a few extra thousand people in the electorate could actually make the difference, especially for a candidate like Mamdani.